Hello children, I'm going to start today's collective worship by sharing my screen, and as always I would like to start by saying this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us all rejoice and be glad in it. Okay, so children, all this half term we have been thinking about the jigsaw theme, relationships. And today we're going to share a story to help us think about what we know and how we can show makes a really good relationship. I know some of you have had quite a difficult half term thinking about friendships, thinking about how we get on with one another. And this is the last week we're focusing on this. So I'd really like you this week to think very carefully about this. So I have found a story by a very famous author called Oscar Wilde. And I thought this story was quite appropriate because sometimes we really do need to think, not just at school, but out of school. And sometimes fictional stories help us think, yes, that has made me think. And hopefully you'll feel like that at the end of this story. So this is how it goes. Every afternoon, as they were coming home from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a lovely garden with soft green grass and beautiful flowers like stars. There were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn grew rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games so that they could listen to them. How happy they all were. And they used to play joyfully, as good friends always do. Then, one day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for a whole 7 years. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children were so scared that they ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in my garden but myself." So he built a high wall all around his garden, and he put up a notice on the side of the wall saying, "Trespassers will be removed." He was indeed a very, very selfish giant. Some of the younger children might like to understand what trespassers mean. If you know what that means, then you don't need to ask anybody, but perhaps grown-ups might like to explain to some of the younger children, what are trespassers? Okay, so I'm going to move on. The poor children had nowhere to play now. They tried to play on the road, but the road was dangerous. It was dusty and they didn't like it. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over, and they talked about the beautiful garden that they could see inside. "Oh, how happy we used to be when we played in there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the countryside there were little blossoms and little birds, but it was only in the garden of the selfish giant. It was still winter. The birds didn't want to sing because there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice about trespassers being removed, it went back into the grass. I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming, said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold, white garden. I hope there's going to be a change in the weather very soon. But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. He is too selfish, she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some beautiful music. It sounded so sweet. He thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was only a little linnet singing outside his window. But it was so long since he'd heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to be the most beautiful sound in the whole world. Then the hail suddenly stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open window. "Ah, I believe spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw the most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree he could see there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they'd covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in one corner it was still winter. It was the furthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small he couldn't reach up to the branches of the tree. And he was wandering all around, crying bitterly on his own. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the little boy was too tiny. The giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall. My garden is going to be the best children's playground for ever and ever." He was really sorry for what he had done, so he crept downstairs and opened the front door softly, went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy, who did not run, because his eyes were so full of tears, he didn't see the giant coming. The giant stole up behind him and took him very gently in his hand, and he put the little boy up into the tree. And the tree, as soon as it had the little boy in there, broke out into blossom. The birds started singing, and the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them round the giant's neck, saying, thank you, Mr. Giant." When the other children saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, they came running back, and with them came the spring. "It's your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down all the wall. When the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing, and the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. And that's the end of the story about the little, or I should say not the little, but the selfish giant. Now, in that story, we heard lots and lots about relationships, thinking about how we can actually sometimes not realise we're being unkind, but if we really think about it and we listen and we look around us and we talk to people, we sometimes see the error of our ways, and that's really important, children. Just like the selfish giant, if perhaps some of you haven't been very kind and you don't know what makes a good relationship, you need to think about that and think, how can I really show others that I want to be a good friend, but also have really positive relationships, not just at school, but out of school as well. Okay, so we're going to think now about that story. Have a little moment, just close your eyes, put your hands together if you'd like to, and we're going to say a little prayer together. Dear God, love is patient, love is kind, love is hopeful, love is trusting, love is humble. God, thank you for loving me and help me to love others too. Amen. Thank you for listening this morning, children. And remember, this is the last week we're going to be looking particularly for those really good relationships happening at school. And maybe you're one of those people that likes to get children to play together or be kind to one another. Let's see who that's going to be this week. Okay. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you for listening, children. See you soon. Bye for now. Bye.